Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned. Hopefully, for the rest of the month with our regularly scheduled programming. Hopefully, we can pull it off, Roger. Maybe. Anyway, we have returned today to talk to you about a Booktube event coming up next month in July, which is coming up really soon, actually. How could June almost be over? But coming up in July is Booktube at War. Booktube at War. A reading event created by a viewer, actually. This was created by DDB, who comments on my channel a lot and a lot of other channels he comments on. And DDB came up with this idea of having a reading event centered on fiction and nonfiction books about war. And so I've got my TBR today. The books I'll be reading, hopefully, in July. So this is a much more modest TBR than my TBR for June on the Range. I've learned my lesson. No, I haven't. I never learn lessons, but there are fewer books in this one. For one thing, they're a little bit longer, some of them, and also for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club in July, we're reading this. This is The Last Man by Mary Shelley, and this is not a short book. This is the Norton Critical Edition of The Last Man by Mary Shelley. And there is a war that takes place in this. This takes place in the far future, in the 21st century. I think it takes place in the 21st century, the far distant future. It was far distant for Mary Shelley. So it's a science fiction novel. And there is a war that happens in this, but I don't know how central the war is to the story. So I don't think it's really about the war. I think this is about the plague, the worldwide pandemic that happens after the war, wiping everybody else out except for the last man, the lonely last man. So we'll be reading this for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, and this will be an investment of time. I probably will start this a little bit early, actually, but after I read this, I'm going to read these books for Booktube at War. So the first book is on my Kindle. I actually went through my Kindle just to see if there was anything that would work for this event, because I've got hundreds of books lurking in my Kindle library, many of which I bought years and years ago and forgot about. And this was a book that I found that I had forgotten about, that I must have bought. It wasn't, it could have been one of the first books I bought for my Kindle, actually, because I scrolled down almost to the bottom of the list of the books that I bought on my Kindle, and I found this one. This is Stephen Pressfield's Tides of War. This is Tides of War by Stephen Pressfield. Now, he is known for his novel of ancient warfare, Gates of Fire. He's known for Gates of Fire, about the 300 Spartans fighting the Persians. And this is also a novel of ancient warfare, but this is about Alcibiades and the Peloponnesian War. So I'm sort of surprised I haven't read it yet, because one of my chief interests is ancient history. And I have read a lot about the Peloponnesian War. I've read Thucydides 3 times, and will read him a 4th time, undoubtedly. So I'm surprised I haven't read this yet. In fact, I'm surprised I forgot I had it. But it was there, lurking on my Kindle, just waiting for Booktube at War. So Tides of War by Stephen Pressfield. And I don't know how good this book is. I mean, Gates of Fire was a really good book and is always talked about as a really good historical novel about the ancient world. But this, I never hear anything about. So I don't know how good this actually is. It's a mystery. I guess I could have looked it up on Goodreads or something, but of course I didn't because I'm lazy. But I do have this book lurking on my Kindle, so I'm going to read it as the first book I read for Booktube at War. So there you go, Tides of War by Stephen Pressfield about Alcibiades. That sneaky guy, Alcibiades, and the Peloponnesian War. So that'll be cool. The next thing I'm going to read is a book that I'm really surprised I haven't read yet, and that's this one. This is The Killer Angels by Michael Shara. Now, this is a book about the American Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg. I think the film Gettysburg was based on this, I think. I don't know. I saw that movie a long time ago. I remember it being decent, but I've never read the book. I've had it forever, and this book looks like it was sitting out in the sun too long. It's a very old, very faded paperback copy of The Killer Angels, but I hear it's great. And so I couldn't, I dug this out. I can't pass up the opportunity to actually have an excuse to read this. The Killer Angels by Michael Shara. It's supposed to be great. So this will be the next book I read after that Peloponnesian War book. The Killer Angels by Michael Shara, which I think everybody in the world has read except me. So there you go. Now the next book, this is the second book in a series, actually. This is Hornblower. This is Lieutenant Hornblower by C.S. Forester. This book, this is the second book in the continuing saga of Horatio Hornblower, the most extraordinary naval hero in all fiction. In this story, we experience the heartbreak and violence of life on board the fighting ships of the Napoleonic era. So there you go. I really enjoyed the first book in the series, and I had intended to read all of the books in the series, and I do. I just haven't gotten back to the series yet. I think I read the first one a few months ago, but this is the second one, Lieutenant Hornblower. And this was my stepfather's favorite series of books. I used to see him reading these books like over and over and over and over again. He thought they were wonderful, and I inherited all of these old paperbacks from him. And so, yeah, I fully intend to read all of these. And the first one was really good, so I can see what he saw in this series. And this one looks cool. So there we go, Lieutenant Hornblower. And that's all of the regular novels that I'll be reading. But don't worry, there are comic books as well, of course. This is Sergeant Rock. This is Showcase Presents Sergeant Rock, which is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, war comic books ever done. This was DC Comics. DC Comics had a few war comic books during the late 60s and 70s. And into the 80s, I guess. They still existed into the 80s. And Sergeant Rock was the best. Sergeant Rock was a great war comic book. It has... This one has 500 pages of Sergeant Rock. Artwork by Joe Kubert. One of the greats of comic book art. And it's all in black and white because that's what these cheapy Showcase Presents books were. And DC Comics have not come out with an omnibus or any kind of hardcover collection or even paperback collection of these Sergeant Rock comics. And why? Why don't you come out with... What's wrong with you, DC Comics? These are amazing. And so I've been waiting for a Sergeant Rock omnibus, and it just hasn't happened. But at least I've got this, Showcase Presents Sergeant Rock. And I'm definitely going to take advantage of Booktube War to read these once again, because I read these all the time when I was a kid. World War II was a big deal when I was a kid, because, it hadn't been over that long when I was a kid. And so, we always heard about World War II, like always. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed these. But also, another comic book from DC Comics, Enemy Ace, also in the Showcase Presents volume. Now, this series was really interesting. First of all, it was about an enemy ace in World War I, which was kind of something, a comic book all about the enemy. That was unusual. And this has Joe Kubert artwork as well, but it also has a bunch of other great artists. It's got John Severin's in here, Howard Chaykin, Frank Thorne, Neil Adams. So this volume has a bunch of great artists. It's really cool. And I remember this series being really great, full of World War I planes shooting at each other. It was a really cool series. I remember this being really good. So I'm looking forward to reading this again. So yeah, Enemy Ace. And then the last thing on my TBR here is Blazing Combat. This was put out by Warren, who also put out Vampirella and Eerie and Creepy, those black and white horror comic book magazines that came out in the 60s and again into the 70s. But this comic book, Blazing Combat, see if they have the covers reprinted here in the back. Yeah, Blazing Combat. It came out in 4 issues with covers by Frank Frazetta, the great Frank Frazetta. Now this only lasted 4 issues because it came out in the Vietnam War, and it was a very anti-war comic book, and it did not present the Vietnam War when it had stories about the Vietnam War. It has stories about all different wars in here. It didn't present it in a wonderful light, because it was war, and war is horrible. And these stories in this volume were all written by Archie Goodwin, but with a bunch of really fantastic artists. We've got Wally Wood is in here, John Severin, Alex Toth, Al Williamson, Reed Crandall, Joe Orlando, Gene Colan is in here. And the reproduction on these stories is just incredible. This is a great book. And like I said, the reproduction of the artwork is just beautiful in this. And many consider this, not Sergeant Rock, many consider this to be the greatest war comic book ever done. Was it? I don't know, but I'm certainly going to read it for Booktube War. Now that's it. That's everything. Like I said, there's not as much in this list as there was, or this TBR as there was for my June on the Range TBR, because this month has sort of been a disaster as far as reading time is concerned, or the most important thing of all, making videos. But I should be back regularly on my regularly scheduled programming starting tomorrow, Sunday, starting tomorrow with my weekend reading report. And then on Monday, I will have another video of some kind. We just have to figure out what that video is going to be. So there you go. I will catch you next time.